So, I mean, interestingly enough, another piece that's like that, I think a lot of guitarists get put off, is Barrios's Choro de Saudade because of the tuning.
Right. Okay.
And so that is such a beautiful Chopin-esque piece for us. And I think why are more guitarists not playing it?
I
And
played it a lot. And I yeah, I definitely performed it a lot, and
yeah,
I found it was a piece that it just sounds like pure guitar music.
it's well written, it's well composed, but again, it's getting those notes off the stave and being able to work through the drop D and G tuning of your two strings. So that's another piece in the future for me for YouTube, because I genuinely think that is one of the masterpieces of
Well,
our
it's definitely a
repertoire,
very deep piece,
and it's
and
not
it's
played
just got
that often.
yeah, it's got beautiful tones to it. I mean, because of course everybody knows, or most people know, Recuerdos de la Alhambra,
Yes.
Tarraga, and you know there's that sort of floating beauty to it, the evocative beauty, and the Barrios
Uh-huh.
has that in abundance.
And so much more. Yeah, exactly. And so much more. He basically he sort of starts where Tarraga was and then just goes zoom and takes us somewhere completely different. And that is why I love that piece as well. So I'm guessing it's the Arm for a Love of God.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, and I mean that's a lovely, another genuine masterpiece that people should be playing. But again, it's put off because of the technicality.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
I mean, with all Barrios, I mean, you've
yes.
got the chord positions.
He must have had, yeah, do you know what? He must have had really big hands. He really must have had big hands. I mean, I'm going through, it's really quite funny. I'm going through the Cathedral currently. I'm just finishing up the last couple of videos of the Cathedral. And I keep going over the ending of the Cathedral because of that. So we've got that lovely ending where he's literally just got that B minor chord. And then he just shifts it up the guitar like that. And I put the video out on Instagram, and one of my key former students came back to me straight away. It's like, no, no, this is how you play it. And then he did the alternative fingering, which is where you go this way through the B minor
Oh, I see. Yes.
script and then into that. So it involves more shifting, but is nowhere near as bar intensive. You've got to hold it down with really difficult fingering. And so, yeah, the cheek is so cheeky. He's like, is it too much for you, old man? But that is Barrios's original fingering that I'm using. And Jim, the honest truth is, I didn't have the bar strength to be able to play it before. So I did play the alternative version where you go backwards through the B minor that way and then shift up because there is no bar. And so it's things like that Barrios just excels at. In the middle of the Una Limosna one where he's got that bar chord here. Oh, no, no,
Oh,
no.
there's one point where it gets really yes with the open B.
Yeah, and then he pushes it up and then all the way through. And I mean that again also takes a
That's where
ton
John
of
Williams changes his fingering. I noticed John Williams had a little trick because I was playing the piece.
yeah.
It does something.
That's it, and it's up to the D sharp, yeah.
And he does something.
I
He
haven't
moves it. Oh,
I haven't played that
I
in
thought I could.
ages, so
I
yeah.
thought I could remember it, but I can't at the
Yeah, but
moment.
that's exactly it. And it's just having that pure bar because you've sat with that is it a B? The
You know
B
it
with
better
the
than me
D, you
at the
sat like
moment.
that for ages first just to get that, and then you got the B with the D sharp, and then he does the B with the D sharp up to an E, and then back to that bar chord, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of Barrios obviously had very strong left hand, no two ways about it.
Well, there's that that one that's a nightmare is the
Yes.
Mind it when you're cold.
Yeah, completely. Where you've got to stretch backwards, and then you've got to do that. Yeah, completely.
You have to make sure you're really warm.
Yeah, where you've got to sort of bar across 2 frets, a crossbar. Fantastic. And again, literally, that's something that no one really sort of picked up with. That was the first article I wrote for Classical Guitar Magazine.
Right, okay.
I sent that into them, and it was the evolution of the bar chord, where I literally said, right, well, listen, this is where we're at. We've got these fantastic basic bar chords, and then we have Barrios, and he literally did that crossbar backwards. But actually, in the one Prelude, he actually does a crossbar forwards, I think, as well. That classic jazz thing, you'll get a lot of jazz players where they'll play a bass note in fret 4 and a top note in fret 3.
You mean like the major seventh sort of thing, though?
Yeah, exactly like that. And
it's very Latin, isn't it?
Yeah, and so Barrios has done that as well, I think. I just don't think it's been put in, but he was amazing for that, where he literally put he had the ability to think beyond technique. So I love Barrios. Again, it's just, it's one of those things. I think we need to play more of him.
I'm sitting here talking to you, and that fingering's coming back to me now. I'm just messed up earlier. The other piece that you analysed that I thought was really interesting, you started looking at the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro, Bach.
Yes.
Which is a very intense piece of music.
That was off the back of a private student I had. He was learning it, and I said to him, let's try another piece. I said, I don't mind doing the Prelude. I said, but that fugue is a monster. It is a monster fugue. And he was like, no, I'm like, right, so we're gonna break it down. We're gonna break it down into 4-bar segments, and it's gonna take you ages, but you'll get it in the end. And so, yeah, that was all of my fingering and all my thoughts off the back of what was essentially, I think, something like 6 months worth of lessons, where I did the Prelude, we then did the Fugue, and then we did the Allegro as well. I love late Bach, and that's a late Bach masterpiece.
Playing Bach, especially that piece, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle when it comes to putting the fingerings together. Perhaps this is something that I think it's the difference between when you get to a particular level of guitar playing, you start to realise that how important fingerings are. I mean, sometimes lower down you can just jump from one thing to another, but if you really want to master the guitar, I think this thought process of mapping out how you're going to approach this is all important. So, do you have to make your own additions then? Because I know certainly when I played the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro, and I made it something, a life ambition. It was like, right, that was actually a bucket list piece for me.
I'm not surprised. It's massive.
So I did an addition of. I sort of wrote all the fingering out, and I just thought, right, that's it. I've just got to hibernate and just write this all out, and just make sure that I've got a way of playing it that's set, and I'm just going to learn it that way. And if there's any fingerings that need troubleshooting and any problems, I've just got to keep writing it back into the score. Do you find that's the only way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, you get that initial go through, don't you, where you go through and you play and you're like, oh, I can finger it here, but I can also possibly, and then you start to make decisions early on, don't you? With that one particularly, because I was teaching it, I was always, say, a week or two ahead of my student, because of that very reason, because I had to be able to explain and show him the fingerings properly, because that fugue in the middle section has some horrendous, for us anyway, fingering options, and so you had to make really good decisions about that. But what I found interesting was when I went back to do it for the YouTube video, I changed some of those. So
Okay.
I actually I came up with better options, and for me personally, and I think it's a continuous process sometimes where you literally you are working through it, but you're like, well, hang on, could I play this somewhere else? And then you'll stop because you know it's in the system, and you know you're not worried about learning it. You're not under pressure. You give it you have another go at maybe a difficult passage.
I,
But yeah,
you know,
all of my own editions now. I don't. I hate getting an edition where an editor has put their
yes.
fingerings in. It's terrible because that's what I do. That's what I do. I publish my own, but I try my best to give options for people. But you get these editions where it's like, this is the way, do it this way. No.
I get some editions of music, and I have the terrible thought, and I shouldn't think this, but I get the terrible thought that the guy who put the fingering in doesn't know what he's doing.
No, do you know what? Actually, that is that I literally I've come across quite a few editions like that where it's so blatantly obvious they don't play. And it vexes me greatly because it's not a difficult thing, and I get it. You're under pressure. You've got to put your fingering in. Then you possibly they might have had to put tab in, and then you've got to typeset it and put it all nice and neat. I get that, but for the love of God, at the very least, one of the basics that I do is I will slow the piece down with the tab in and listen to it as Sibelius plays through it, so that I can pick up all the wrong notes between the two straight away because they crunch. And then I will play through both. I will play through the stave to check that my fingering is correct. And then I will play through the tab to see that my tab matches what the fingering is. Yes, it's a pain. And, I would I would love to be able to outsource this to someone, but it's got to be done. If I want it done properly, then that's the way to do it. So yeah, I completely. There are so many editions, and so a lot of the time, I remember when I first learned Leander, the Albeniz piece. There was a notorious edition out at the time that I bought, and I brought into my teacher, who was Neil Smith, and he laughed at me and he said, "No, no, no, we're not doing that." And he gave me a copy of his edition. He's like, "There are too many errors in this edition for you to use." And yeah, I was none the wiser. This was the edition. That's what the music shop had, and it's the piece I wanted to play. And yeah, so you've got to be careful, kids.
And isn't it funny? You can take a piece of music that's been edited and fingered by, say, Julian Bream.
Hmm.
You could take another piece of music that's been fingered and edited by John Williams. And I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about the same piece, but you can just get a feeling if you look at the Five Bagatelles by William Wharton, and you follow Julian Bream's fingering. They're not logical fingerings. You can see that his approach is tonal. He wants to play particular phrases on a certain string that's in many ways counterintuitive. Whereas,
Yeah, I mean,
very
sorry,
often
no.
John Williams is the other way around. Sometimes he's absolutely, you can see he's going from one position to the next, and he's trying to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, I was very fortunate because I studied with John Mills, who knew Bream personally, and then also studied with Williams. And he said to me, he said John Williams had some of the best fingering choices he ever saw. He was a master at being able to pick the right fingering for the right piece. Whereas, as you said with Julian Bream, it's all about the expression. And I think it's Bagatelle number 3. There is a particular moment where Bream just takes the note all the way up the fretboard to really milk the hell out of it on string 4, and then take it all the way back down again. He just does it, and that is Bream. And so yeah, I think from that point of view, I think that's important. I think those additions are super important, but then you've got to be aware of that.
Do you think he learnt that from looking at things like Tarraga, like looking at the fingerings, like in Tarraga's? Because Tarraga has some very,
Yeah.
singular string movements as
I
well.
don't, I don't honestly know. He is a bit of a romantic at heart, isn't he, Julian Bream? I think, and it was always about the expression over, say, the technique. I think I don't know. I've come, when I first started, it was Julian Bream was the more passionate expression of player, and then John Williams was this monster who could just play anything, and there was nothing that you could chuck at John Williams that he couldn't play. But as I've got older and I've listened to more of his music, his expression, his phrasing, his tone is so subtle. It's just so subtle. You don't actually hear it as that, especially on some of the recordings. And so, yeah, I've kind of evened that out a little bit. I think John Williams was just as expressive. He just did it a little bit more subtly than, say, Julian Bream.
I liken them to the two characters, Nicky Lauder and
All
James
right.
Hunt.
Yeah.
If you think of those two, and
Yeah.
that's like John Williams and Julian Bream all over. One is efficient.
Yeah, and one's very passionate. No, that's so true. But I mean, what they are the epitome of classical guitar, I think.
There is
Certainly.
I mean, there's a serious story behind all this, because when you think about what a guitarist is, what a musician is, you're like constantly training for the Olympics at a high level, and you're honing your technique, you're shaving off time and efficiency by changing your fingerings, like when you're playing the Bach Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro. You're approaching it much like an Olympian or even a Formula One driver trying to shave time off a lap, or a motor, like a Grand Prix motorcycle racer.
Completely. And I think a lot of people don't actually see that. They don't see the work that you do behind the scenes. They don't see the hours that you spend trying to fix the fingering, or trying to learn it, or to even just deep dive, because taking the Bach again, to be able to deep dive under the hood of that Bach fugue, you've got to have a certain level of theory, because Bach is doing so many amazing things with the music, and you don't always see that when you just play through it. So yeah, completely. It's an extreme sport for sure. And I think also, because one of the questions you asked me was, how do you prepare for live performances? And that kind of feeds into that, because when you do, or certainly for me, when I do live performances, I need the security of having gone through the pieces in my head without the guitar. I need the security of having read through the music without the guitar. So being able to hear it on the page and in my head at the same time with no guitar at all. Because at the end of the day, the guitar does nothing. It's me that does all the work. And so mentally, you've got to be in that headspace to say, yes, I'm confident. I know where the notes are going, what they're doing. And that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of commitment too.
I mean, musicians are dealing, on a performance level, you're dealing with huge levels of stress, anxiety, for performance, because you've got the constant fear that, especially when you're a soloist, the one thing that makes you different from playing in a band is that if you're playing in a band and it's a 4-piece band, if you suddenly forget what you're doing, the rest of them are carrying on. Pretty much. It's very rare that all 4 of you are going to forget what you're going to do at the same moment.
No, completely.
But
there's a cover, isn't there? It's cover. You've got cover. Whereas, solo performance on classical guitar is a tightrope. One misstep and you're gonna fall. Especially if it's a bad one. But by the same token, I know, because purely with working with the young guitarists at the Welsh College and stuff like that, performance issues are a problem, especially when they're coming in young. There's always that oh my god, I'm gonna screw it up, or I'm gonna forget my notes or something like that. I'm like, well, yeah, you are. Of course you are. Everybody does. But don't worry about it. The trick is to get back into the flow of things so that people don't actually notice the stumble. And 9 times out of 10, unless they've got a score with them or they know the piece really well, they're not going to notice if you've cocked the note up, or you've missed that fret. It was meant to be fret 7, you hit fret 6. You just kind of move on from that. But it's managing that. That's the real trick of a classical musician, especially solo guitar. Managing that fear, managing that stress, and being able to think clearly on stage. And that just takes experience. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. No two ways about it.
I was doing something yesterday, and I shouldn't really say this in an interview, but it involves. It actually involved dance steps and playing.
Okay,
now I don't dance, and the thing that I was playing was kind of, it didn't feel quite natural to start with, but there is something psychologically that goes on when you're trying to play. Obviously, you've got left, right, and you've got left, right brain, and you've got this kind of I don't know, it's like a sixth sense, or it's like a thought in the back of your mind that says, right, take it steady here, don't take any risks.
Yeah, you're going with it. And you're not aware of what your body's doing, in essence. Whereas something like dancing really forces you to think of more than just your hands, doesn't it? You know, it's the same as when you're in a band. You have to move around stage, and so you get the feel of where you win and where you could do it, because some passages you can't play and still dance and move around the stage because they might be technically too challenging. But yeah,
So you need an element of, in other words, it's a kind of multitasking element. But multitasking has to be learnt, especially with music, because there's all this syncopation going on, and there's various technical things going on. And what I say to my students is, before any section, I say, you know, you have to sort of make a mental note, say on beat 3, that is coming up on, you know, so you're already ready with the one finger or whatever it is. Do you find that it's certain types of coordinations are better learned in a specific place, and then you just keep repeating so you can kind of learn that syncopation?
yeah, completely. It also depends on the piece. So if we go back to the Bach, when I was teaching that, I literally used to sit and talk him through it as you go, because he hadn't got that awareness. I would say, right, we're moving here, and then the next bit is here. Think this, say this, next bit here. So that I was constantly feeding signposts, because I think it's so important. And when I'm playing, that's especially something like Bach, because at the moment I'm doing the Chaconne. The Chaconne is going to be the back half of this year, you know, and that's a massive piece. And so in order to work your way through all of those variations, you have to constantly talk to yourself to say, right, this is what's next. This fingering, this rhythm, this scale, and you know, Bach has chucked the whole kitchen sink into there. You've got to talk to yourself as you play through it, for sure. But something like I'm doing Dyens is one of the requests I had was Dyens's Fuoco from Libre Sonatine, so the third movement of Libre Sonatine. That requires separate hand coordination sometimes as well. So you get that fantastic, you know, that fantastic opening. That. Sorry, I'm going to lift my guitar up so you can see. Prepped fingers. Right hand practice on its own. The left hand will follow to a certain degree, but your right hand is what's going to slow you down with that. So unless you can get your right hand up to speed, it doesn't matter what your left hand's doing. So that's a simple exercise, and I will sit and do that as a warm-up for that. And then obviously the ending as well, where you've got that, you know, to be able to play that, fast, you've got to be able to play it slow first. And to feel it swing, because it has a swing to it, because that piece originally was written for a trio. It wasn't written for classical guitar. And so that is the bass player doing pop and slap. That's not a classical guitarist, that's the bass player playing pop and slap. So, you know, when I'm teaching this, it's get into the swing. And really, you know, you're a bass player. You're not a classical guitarist. You're a bass player at the moment. You know, with the drums, that's what's happening in that piece. So yeah, it's context. Being able to break the music down and to do it, and anything with rhythm and stuff like that. 9 times out of 10, if it's a fixed left hand position, you can solo your right hand to really get on top of it, so that you've got the confidence to be able to do the two together. I think anyway. That's my sort of perspective.